laughs and creates her spell charm there. On the other side, Harem, after having his meal, lays there on the ground and is sleeping with his hand on his stomach. Harem was snoring meanwhile. He heard the sound of crashing something outside. That sound he woke up from sleep and quickly sat up there. After this, sitting there in the prison, he hears the sound of jumping, cracking and crashing. Meanwhile, the prison door crashes. He turns his head to look, and the body of a player with orange clothes crashes through the door. Moreover, the dust explosion occurred there due to the crashing of the prison door, and Harem sat there silently watching that explosion. From that explosion, Yuram with her subordinate gets there and sees her. Harem surprisingly says, "Big sister." On the other side, military helicopter arrived at the prison island. The island was destroyed due to the fire explosion. The helicopter landed on the ground, and from that helicopter Kim and Agent Gu came out, and they were surprised to see an explosion there. Also, the smoke spread all around. There is this agent. Gu says they expected her to come there, but then she quickly turns and orders his subordinates to search for any survivor, and they answer, "Yes, madam." However, Agent Gu's subordinates move from there to search for the survivors, and Kim stands ahead of her and asks the system if there are any survivors inside. System answers, and the window appears before him. There are currently no survivors inside the building. Hearing this, Kim turned, informing Agent Gu there were no survivors. She was surprised and asked him how he knew about that. Kim looked aside, answering her he would explain the details later. "First, let's head inside." Agent Gu nods, answering all right, while thinking he is surprisingly hard to talk to. After this, both of them move ahead, but as soon as they enter the prison, they are surprised to see the soldier's corpse lying there on the ground. Also, the spell charm activated there sees this agent. Gu says the magic circles were fully operational, and Kim adds his point, saying that a lesser one can't stop the greater strength. However, Agent Gu, looking toward the soldier corpses, says they were one step too late then. Kim stands and stares at her, asking where they should go now, and she replies she has a way to find that out. After this, Agent Gu creates the magic with her hand, and from that magic, a flash of light occurs. However, she releases the magic sparkle from her hand toward the ground. As soon as that magic sparkle falls on the ground, a bunch of rats gather near her. Moreover, she sat there on the ground on her feet, and that flash of magic spread near her in a circle, and the rats were gathered before her. Sees this, Kim gets surprised, and she sits there, looks up toward him, smiles, saying don't be alarmed, they are her friends. Further, Tamer Jueigu was gifted with the ability to befriend animals and plants. This ability was extremely rare to find even among players. But she was capable of more than just commanding the animals. Also, the rat's eye started to glow, and in response, Kim nodded. Then he looks toward Agent Gu, and those rats ask the system, what is she doing right now? The system answers she is communicating with the animals. It's a mysterious ability. Hears this, Kim presses his lower lips inside, thinking communicating with the animals is incredible. After this, she says Kim, these children are telling her that the culprits commenced a horrible slaughter and then escaped the prison to head west. Further, she gets up saying to Kim they should start a new pursuit toward the west, and that the guild master's deceptions might be powerful. But it can't deceive every eye that's watching her. However, Yuram, with her subordinate, took Harem from the prison outside. Harem stood there, brushing his stomach, and asked her sister how she managed to come and find him. Further, he starts sweating and fearfully says Ms. Gu couldn't have just let her rescue him so easily. Hears this, Yuram calls Harem's name. He heads up asking her what, and she turns her eyes, answering don't ever mention that name, with an honorific in front of her again. That woman is an ungrateful traitor who stabbed them in the back. Harem shudders, nod, answering okay big sister. He won't do it ever again, while thinking big sister has always resented Ms. Gu. Yuram smiles, answering him good, that's her sweet little brother. Then she with her magic spell sets fire to the wood inside the iron tin. After this, Harem asks her what are they going to do now? Are they going to leave this country, and are they going to reassemble the Shield Guild? Hears this, Yuram laughs and answers he will get to find out soon enough, little brother. Harem was speechless also, he was scared. Then she turned and stepped toward her brother, saying, but there is something they need to finish there before they begin. Further, she grits, saying South Korea abandoned them when they risked their lives to protect it, and that the traitor even tried to have them all killed. And they have to punish them all. This time they will finally rip Seongrong-gu and her lackeys with their own hands. Harem. However, he answers he can't win a fight against South Korea. Then he fearfully says no to that monster Jibong, Kim's big sister. At the mention of Kim's name, he started trembling, then Urim grabbed his muscles and stared at him, saying her little brother had become a lot younger since the last time they met. Harem fearfully says, let's just leave this country, big sister. If they end up going against that monster, even as he is about to complete his sentence, she clenches his arm and Harem in pain clenches his teeth. While thinking, was she always this strong? Then she grabbed his both arms and clenched them, saying, listen Harem, she is no longer who she used to be before, and no one can stop her, not even Sangrong-gu and Jibong Kim. Harem fearfully looks toward her subordinate, stands aside, and looks toward her. Her eyes turn red, and the mark on his body also turns red. After this, both of them move from there to outside the island prison where the birds are squawking over the sea. One of the hawks, while squawking, came and sat on Agent Gu's hand. Also the bird's eyes were glowing when it sat on her hand. Further, she communicates with the hawk. After informing her about the culprits, the hawk flies away, and she stands there thanks to the bird, calling it her child. After this, she looks toward Kim, telling him they must be hiding somewhere around there. Then they both move ahead. While on the way, Kim asks her what she knows about the Shield's Guildmaster. She answered she was a terrifying individual, Kim surprisingly asked, and she nodded. Then she turned her eyes and looked toward Kim, explaining she was one of the earliest ones to awaken. Even among the first generation, she was stronger and crueler than anyone else. Moreover, she says she would stop at nothing to gain more power and kill the monsters in her path. Telling this, Agent Gu starts to tremble. Then she grabbed her arm, saying so many innocent lives were taken because of that. Kim surprisingly looked toward her silently and then asked how was someone like that had not convicted of her crimes already. Agent Gu looks toward the answer. She guesses that's just how things were back then. Hears this, Kim remains silent. After this, pointing ahead, she says there's a warehouse complex on the western hill. They should go and check it out. However, both of them walking on foot arrive outside that farmhouse. As they both stand outside near the tress, Kim asks her does she thinks they are there, and she stands beside the tree and answers yes. They can't hide from all the animals. Then Kim asked the system to search the area for any human activity. System started initiating its search and then scanned the whole warehouse. The system answered, informing him about the group of people that were working there. Communicating with the system, Kim stands there, closes his eyes, then opens his eyes and looks ahead, telling Agent Gu 10 people are hiding inside the warehouse. The Shield Guild Master and Harem Park hear this. She is surprised. Then Kim sits on the ground holding a stick. However, with this stick, Kim drew a block on the mud ground, and he made some small triangles, saying he wished they could just charge straight into them. But they need to gain more information and reduce as many casualties as they can, so they will have to infiltrate the building from the right. Then she scratches the stick on the scribble that he draws on the ground to make her understand his plan. Further, he says where they are keeping the least amount of guards. Both Urim and Harem Park stand inside the room, while the guards stand there at a distance from each other outside that room. Both Kim and Ju Ae-gu were outside the warehouse, and 2 guards stood there near the wall where Kim and Gu were. Kim makes the plan to kill both guards first to move toward both brother and sister. Explaining this, he tells her to get the job done quickly and effectively. Hears this, all Gu gets surprised, thinking she could only figure out the general number of the group. Then she asked herself how was he able to figure out their exact number and positions. Thinking this all, she was staring at him, and Kim sat there before her, surprisingly looked toward her, asking if there was something wrong. She extended her hand and smiled, answering no, everything is fine. Here's this, Kim says all right then let's start moving. Then they both move ahead toward the warehouse. Both of them jump over the wall and enter. As soon as they jump, a guard gets there asking who goes there. Both of them get alert. However, the guard angrily takes out his sword from the sword holder belt and clanks it, while Kim stands there looking toward the guard there. Said he guessed this was to be expected, and she answered she guessed so. The guard clenched his teeth, saying they must leave immediately, this place is out of bounds. Then the other guard and his companion also joined him. However, both of the guards holding their swords move toward them and see Agent Gu quickly stand before Kim, opens arms and says let her take care of this. Kim silently stands behind her, then she pinches with her hand, while the guards angrily jump toward them while she snaps the pinch. They both arrived near them to attack them with their sword, but before they attacked, a magic cat appeared there from Gu pinch and attacked the guards. See this, Kim surprisingly asks is that a cat. She replies there were a lot of friendly children by the port. Both guards fearfully fall backward on the cracked ground while the magic cat moves toward them hissing. Agent Gu, creating the spell with her hand, says to let her show him what a tamer is capable of. On the other side, Kang with his team members and military soldier goes to his mission to find the fire dragon remains. He sits on the ground and sniffs the floor, sees him sniffing. Vice Captain surprisingly asks Rookie if is he sure he knows what he is doing. Also, the military soldier stands there, sees him sniffing, laughs. Kang heads up and looks toward the Vice Captain, answering yes, the fire dragon has a distinctive smell. Then pointing ahead, Kang smiles, saying they just need to keep going this way. Hearing the military solider surprisingly look toward Kang, Kim's team member, the guy with orange hair, scratches his head, saying it might look weird, but he does get things done, sir. The military soldier turned his head, answering he heard the man they were heading in that direction prepare himself, and in response the orange-haired guy remained silent and smiled, while the Vice Captain scratches his head and Kang rubs his nose. However, in the warehouse, the magic cat attacks the guards and crashes them on the ground. The guards thud and fall away, while the magic cat keeps scratching them. Meanwhile, more guards get there, and the cat crashes them one by one, cracking and thudding them onto the ground. And the dust explosion occurs there. Sees this, both brother and sister get there, while the guards are severely injured. Looking toward the injured guards, Harem gets scared, while Harem angrily looks toward that dust explosion. Because of that explosion, Kim, Agent Gu, and the cat shadow appeared as soon as the dust smoke ended, and they came out. Sees them, Harem fearfully asks Jibong Kim and Ju-ae Gu, and Harem stands beside Harem, says she hasn't heard from her in 10 years, so she assumes she is dead, but she is glad that she is still alive. Ju-ae Gu. However, Gu asks her did she expects her to be grateful for that, and in response, Harem stares at her and sticks out her tongue. Then she gives an evil smile, considering Gu is a snake, then asks did she has already forgotten what she said. Harem screamed at Gu, telling her to never say her name again, and the sound of her scream was so loud they all put their hands on their ears except Kim. Also, due to her loud voice, the windows of the warehouse were broken, and Kim stood there silently, rubbed his little finger in his ear, and pressed his lower lip. Moreover, Harem takes out a recall stone and tightly grabs it in her hand, saying her don't falter herself, she is only glad to see her alive. Then she lifted her hand and stared at the stone, smile, saying that she wanted to be the one to kill her and Seongrong Gu. See that recall stone in her hand, Agent Gu shouts, asking a recall stone, they have to stop her. Then she orders her cat to stop her. The magic cat jumps, hissing and extending its claws to attack her. But before the cat attacks them, their guards get before them to save them from the cat's attack. However, their guards throb and turn themselves into monsters, then move toward the angry cat and support it. The cat gets extremely injured and screams. Seeing this, Agent Gu gets shocked, while Kim silently stands there looking toward those monsters, thinking they are the same monsters that they found in the dungeon. Meanwhile, Harem with her spell charm creates the spell circle and laughs, telling her to come and stop her all she wants, but she will have to get through those monsters first. After this, the monster jumps to attack Agent Gu, but before the monster attacks her, Kim activates his physical enhancement skill and jumps toward Gu to save her. A bright light spreads before her, and she puts her hands before her face, while Kim splits the monster in his one blow. Sees this, Harem stands there fearfully looking toward his sister call out her name, while Kim flies in the air, making his powerful fist move toward Harem. Sees him coming toward them so fast that she smiles and creates the spell barrier before her. Kim's bright light spreads there, and he punches that barrier with all his might. Kim's hand crackled only the one layer of that barrier, while she extended her hand and stood on the other side of that spell barrier. Kim's hand clanged with her hand, and her eyes opened in surprise, while Kim, standing in the air, clenched his teeth, also his eyes turned red. However, a huge light explosion occurs, and that spell light goes upward, the roof of the warehouse cracks, and both Harem and Harem with that spell fly away. However, Kim's light explosion occurs, and the dust and smoke spread there, and the ground where both brother and sister stood gets cracked with the spell. Kim looked up toward the roof from where that flew away in that spell. Then he looked toward his hand and pressed his thumb and moved his arm, thinking that strange it felt like he hit something there. Then he clenched his fist, saying they got away, and Agent Gu stood behind her answer. She even prepared a recall stone. They must be up to something, and this could be a big problem. Also, that injured cat lying there on the floor was screaming. Kim turned and looked toward her, answering her, but they couldn't have gotten too far with a recall stone. Then he looks ahead, saying let's keep pursuing them, and then they both move from there. On the other side, in Sihyung, Gyeonggi province, a bright spell of light fell on the roof of a building, and from that spell, both brother and sister landed on the building's roof. Also, the place where the spell circle created the dust and smoke spread. Yuram sat there on that spell circle in shock, while Taram stood there silently looking toward his sister. Yuram stared at her hand on which Kim punched through that spell barrier and huffed, thinking that man managed to break through her defense in that split second. Also, her hand was injured and her fingers were twitched, and she stood there in shock, vomiting blood. See this? Taram worriedly calls his sister's name, asking her if is she alright. She wipes her mouth with her hand, answering she is fine. Then she turned her head and looked toward his brother, smile, saying this was nothing compared to the pain he had to go through. Taram worriedly answers her, but she should still get some treatment, and in response, she shakes her head and then smiles, asking him to go and get some rest. He must be exhausted. She will call him again soon. Taram remains silent and looks down with a scared face. Then answered, okay sister. Then he stepped ahead, opened the room door and entered, but still he was scared. While Yuram turns and steps ahead and moves from there to and stands up on the roof of the building edge, she looks down toward the people and then says show himself. Meanwhile, a black aura spreads at her backside, and from that aura, the director of the Shield Guild, James Lee, appears, saying his greetings, Guildmaster. She turned her eyes angrily, asking why have he shown up so late. The director stood beside the wall, opened his arms, smiled, answer. He had been preparing to make things easier for her. The mercenaries have successfully stolen the fire dragon's remains, and they are assembling their forces in this city. After this, he put the cigarette in his mouth, saying none of these things could have been done had he revealed himself. She turns her hand and angrily looks toward the director, saying his habit of making excuses hasn't changed. The director adds his point, saying, but it seems like she has become much more powerful, madam. However, Yuram stood with her back to him, asked did he thought she was just fooling around while she was gone. The director answered of course not. Also, he is aware that she would do anything to become a stronger guildmaster, while Yuram angrily answers him that's enough of his nonsense, and then asks to tell her what he knows about Kim. Here's Kim's name. The director squeezes his eyes and sighs, explaining he suddenly appears nowhere without any sign or indications. Here's this, Yuram twitch. Then the director says they tried to recruit him, but ultimately failed, so they recognized him as a threat and tried to eliminate him. But that turned out to be a disaster, as she already knew, and he tried to find out more about him, but all they could find was that he had been missing for 10 years. And that his family had also gone missing in a dungeon break, except for his mother, who is currently in a state of coma. Here's this, Yuram asks does he has any connections with Seongryong-gu. The director, holding the cigarette in his mouth, answers they have no special connections. Yuram adds her point by saying that can't be true, everyone in this world is driven by money and power, he must have some sort of a connection with Seongryong-gu. That wicked hag must have offered him something that stood there on the edge of the building roof. She created her spell storm, saying but none of that matters now. However, with her magic power, she created a huge spell circle over that area in the city. People stood there in the street and rode surprisingly, looking up toward that bright light. Moreover, as soon as people look up, they all become status with her spell. While standing up, she laughs, saying she will finally show everyone what happens when the country she served to protect decides to abandon her. Then, holding the spell circle, she says, and it's time to begin. On the other side, Kang with his subordinates was in search of the thieves. They all were in the car on the roadside. However, on the way, Kang was sniffing while looking out of the car window. He pointed ahead, saying the scent was leading in that direction. Here's this, the vice captain and other team members remain silent. The guy with orange hair asks would the thieves have gone to the city. The other team member sitting beside him in the back seat asks if isn't it more likely for them to hide inside the mountain. Here's this, Kang smirks, answering well his nose is never wrong. Also, the military vehicle was following behind their car, and while on the way the wireless phone rang. The vice captain clicks the button to get the call there. The military captain says good grief, he is not exactly a tracking dog. This is nonsensical of them to track them down by smell. They are living in the 21st century, for goodness sake. Here's this, the vice captain holding the wireless phone squeezes his eye and asks them he apologize, but could they give them a little more time? The military captain angrily replies this is ridiculous. Kang was looking out of the car window and the military vehicle was behind their car. While on the way, Kang turned his head and shouted to stop the car. The vice captain broke the car immediately and the car tires screeched on the road. Kang jumps out of the car window and sees the military captain from his call order the military unit through wireless phone. All units move out of the vehicle. Following the special dungeon control team, The military soldiers get out of their vehicle holding the guns spread on the road. Further, the military captain stands behind and asks, why would the fire dragon's remains ever be hidden in a place like this? There are way too many people in this area, this is unbelievable. Meanwhile, the thieves run toward the military captain from his backside, while the captain stands there and says they need to give him a promotion soon. As he was about to complete his sentence meanwhile, he felt someone running toward him from his backside. He turns his head to look, and he gets scared to see two culprits wearing masks on their faces jump to attack him with a knife. But before they attack him, Vice Captain creates the barrier shield with his magic and attacks them and thuds them away on the road. However, both of them crash, and the Vice Captain stands before the captain creating magic. Sees this, the captain is shocked. After this, both the culprits get up, and the Vice Captain looking toward them says it looks like they are at the right place. However, the dungeon control team and military surround them from all sides, and some of the thieves are hiding in the roofs of the houses with their weapons. Kang swiped his hand on his nose and smiled, saying he told him his nose always right. Then looking toward the culprit, he activated his power and cracked his fists, saying prepare themselves, they thieves. However, the vice captain with his subordinates attacked the thieves. Meanwhile, the thieves hiding on the roof set their signs to shoot them. But before they shoot them, Kang attacks them with his magic and falls them away. Sees this, the army captain stands on the road surprised, and he surprisingly thinks he didn't think they would be reliable without Captain Kim, but they are much stronger. Then what he has heard about them, he asks himself, is this the true power of the special dungeon control team? The vice captain and his subordinates injured those thieves, some of them injured lying on the road, while two of them bent down before the vice captain accepted their defeat. The vice captain stands before them with his subordinates abusing them. Then one of the thieves angrily looks toward the vice captain. Further, vice captain asks them if are they Korean. Meanwhile, the orange-haired guy pointing toward the thieves says, wait, look at those tattoos on their wrists. They must be the members of the Shield Guild. Here's this vice captain angrily looks toward the thieves and says, so this is where they are. While the thief laughs, saying it makes him sick looking at how proud he is. Then he asks that he has some self-defense lessons and something. Further, he laughs, saying they are nothing without Kim. Here's this vice captain angrily look toward him and remains silent. However, the vice captain angrily asks him if he wants to know what they learned. The thief heatedly looks toward the vice captain, asking what. Vice captain kicks and squeaks him on the road, saying he is almost ashamed to learn that they are from the same country. The military soldiers stood before the thieves, pointing their guns toward them. Further, vice captain asked how could a citizen of South Korea join hands with these criminals to terrorize their nation. Here's this, Taekwondo laughs, asking if he thinks he has won already. Don't he? The vice captain looking toward him clenches his teeth. Taekwondo fumbles and takes out something from the pocket, then holding that thing in his hand, he looks toward the vice captain and says don't falter themselves. Because they are not the ones being captured there, they are being captured by them. Here's this vice captain, and the orange-haired guy surprisingly looks toward him. However, Taekwondo and his companion injected that thing in their neck. Their bodies started to throb, and they gained more power and their bodies got way bigger. Sees this, the military soldier and the dungeon control team get surprised. Then one of the military soldiers sacredly looks toward them, asking why their bodies just got way bigger. However, the thieves with their red eyes and large bodies step toward them abuse, then they jump to attack the vice captain, saying they will crash them. While the vice captain and the orange-haired guy silently stood there looking at them coming toward them. But before they attack them, Kang attacks them with his magic, kicks them, and crashes them away, and then he jumps down on the road. Kang turned his head and looked toward the vice captain, asked, was he interfering with them? He was wondering why they were just standing there. Meanwhile, the dungeon control team activates their magic power, Kang says, but he guessed they were already prepared. However, the vice captain creates his power by asking the orange hairs guy, well, did he think those druggies would intimidate them? They have had years of experience with the dungeon. The orange-haired guy looking toward those thieves answers those men are punching bags compared to the monster they have fought. But those people have a weird scent mixed in with a regular smell of humans. Then Kang stands beside them and makes his point, asking them if they should just annihilate them. While the military soldier stands there listening to their conversation, thinks he is just talking about murder with such an innocent face. The vice captain answers Kang no, they have to capture them alive to find out who is behind this. Then he orders his team to arrest them. Then they all run toward them to arrest them. On the other side, in Yui's studio, she sitting on a chair was recording the stream. She while recording winked saying her Yumi hours, as they all may know, is doing a collaboration stream with the famous YouTuber Jinda. Hearing this, the people in the chat room started texting as they all were very excited to see Yui and Jinda's collaboration. Further, she asks the viewers if are they all looking forward to it. Then says Yui's excited too, then she waves her hand and looks toward the camera and says alright Yumi hours, that'll be it for today's stream, until next time, see them again. Everyone, as she was about to click the streaming end button when her subscriber didn't want her to end the stream. She clicked the end button side and sat there on the chair. She took tongs, then checked her mobile phone and was surprised to see Jinda hadn't answered her calls since yesterday. Then she clicks Jinda's contact name in the list to dial his number, thinking they still have so much to talk about the collaboration. This was bad. Then she dialed his number and in return, the system informed him the number she had called was currently unavailable. Here's this, she taps the phone on the table and then with a sad face she asks herself, really? She is just going to be ghosted like this. Further, she asks herself who even does that after committing to a collaboration. Then she asks her cat the right kitty, and in response, her cat sits there on the pillow on the ground and makes a voice. Then she angrily jumps from the chair saying she will have to visit them. On the other side, the dungeon control team beats the thieves and gets them injured, and the military soldier handcuffs their hands while the dungeon control team stands beside the military captains watching this. Then the military captain looks toward those thieves, thanks to the vice captain for arresting them. Further, he says these handcuffs are made from a special alloy. It's strong enough to restrain most players, so it should be more than enough for these men. After this, the vice captain holds that object that those thieves injected and thinks, but what in the world is this thing? Meanwhile, the military soldier from behind calls the commander. Both commander and vice captain turn their head to look, and he informs them that they have found the truck. However, the military captain, his soldier, and the dungeon control team move toward the place where they hide the truck. The truck was empty, and its back door was open. See this, the commander says he thought they finally managed to find the remains. Then he asks does they have to beat the information out of those criminals. The vice captain answered requesting the commander to take those terrorists back to the joint headquarters. Commander, their team will continue searching for the stolen remains. Here's this, the commander asks him does he has a plan in mind. Vice captain turns his eyes, looks toward the commander and sighs. Then he turns his eyes and looking toward the commander points back toward Kang, answering it might be a little crude, but they will go back to employing the method they can trust. Here's this, Kang smiles and rubs his nose and the commander squeezes his eyes and remains silent. However, in the 5-star dungeon, Killa's Swamp Chin was killing the monsters. A huge monster holding its sword stands there, and Chin twirls his weapon, then attacks the monster and splits it. Sees this, more monster get there holding their sword, while Chin's head down is twirling his weapon. Thinking no, then he runs toward the monsters and slices them with his weapon. Chin, while splurting the monster, recalls the time when he was in a dungeon with Yui and Kim, and their Kim broke that shield barrier with his arm. Remembering that time, Chin pressed his lower lips, thinking this wasn't how it felt. Meanwhile, 5-star boss Kill, a monster with multiple hand-holding swords, gets there from behind the tree side roaring. As the monster roared, the dust and smoke spread there due to its roaring loud voice. Chin, holding his weapon and knives, ran toward that monster. While the monster roared and screeched its swords, Chin jumped toward the monster, twirling his knives and slicing it. However, after slicing the monster, Chin with his red eyes jumps down and the monster's boss body parts splatter on the ground. Chin stood there still remembering that time and clenched his teeth, thinking no, this isn't it. The power felt overwhelming back then. Meanwhile, his two subordinates, one with brown hair and one with black hair, get there from behind calling his name. Chin stands there with his back to them. Then one of them with brown hair asks him, he seems even fiercer than the last time they saw him. Is there something in his mind? Chin clunk and answer no, it's nothing. Then he turns and steps toward them. To see him in that angry state, both of them get scared. Then Chin grabbed brown hair's guy's neck and clenched it with his arm, asking didn't tell him not to bother him as he had forgotten his order already. Sees this, the guy with black hair shouts in fear, while neck Chin clenching answers no, they have just come to report that they have lost contact with some of their guild members recently. Here's this, Chin surprisingly asks what with their guild members. The brown hair guy holding Chin's arm winked, answering yes, and what's strange is that they all reside in Sihyung and they were supposed to go on a raid together, but none of them have replied to them. Hears this, Chin asks him did all of them go missing simultaneously, and he hardly replies yes sir because his neck is being clenched. However, Chin released his neck asking that it was strange how could they lose contact with all of them at once, while that brown hair guy standing behind him was pressing his neck. Further, Chin says he was so preoccupied with conquering the dungeon that he forgot to take care of them. All hears this, both of them nod fearfully. After this, Chin orders them, alright, let's go together to Sihyung. However, Kim called the lab doctor at the warehouse where he killed the monster. The lab doctor was clinking the picture of the monster's corpse. Kim and Agent Gu stand aside watching this all. Gu chews her thumbnail. Then she looks toward Kim and says Yuram won't just back down like this. Hears this, Kim surprisingly looks toward her. Then he thoughtfully says she is probably also responsible for the stealing of the fire dragon remains. Agent Gu answers him yes, they must have used firearms to hide their identities as players, but she does not doubt that Yuram was involved in all of this. Kim looks toward her asking, but if that was the case shouldn't they have taken the carcass abroad by now? Agent Gu shakes her head and closes her eyes, answering it must be impossible to teleport across countries. She thinks that's why Yuram entered Korea through an airport instead of just teleporting there. Besides, even if she found a way to teleport out of the country, teleporting the fire dragon's remains would be near impossible because of its immense mana. According to the report of the National Intelligence Service. Hears this, Kim answers her, they must be planning to use the fire dragon's remains somehow. Moreover, Agent Gu surprisingly tells Kim she just received a call from the NIS saying the same thing. However, Ju-ae Gu's explanations left a question in Kim's mind, why did they steal the fire dragon's remains in the first place? Despite its incredible value, they don't have enough time and space to claim anything with the carcass in South Korea. Only one thing was certain about this, Kim pondered deeply. The Arabians had turned into a monster-like appearance, as if they were half human and half monster. The amalgams in the nameless dungeon were closer to a monster than a human. But the Arabians kept more of their human appearance. Moreover, Kim's mobile phone rang. He took out it from his pants pocket to check if it was a call from HWI Kang. Kim picked up the call asking, yes, what is it? Kang answered he found it. Kim surprisingly asked what he meant, and Kang answered he had found out where the bandits were. Also, the dungeon control team was in the car, and the vice captain was driving the car very fast, and Kang was shouting on the phone with his face out of the car window. Kang put the phone in his ear and raised his voice telling them to look it over there, while on Kim's side, he due to that loud voice pulled the phone away from his ear and put it back, scolding Kang he couldn't see where that was. Then Kim asks him to put the vice captain on the line, and Kang pouts answering okay. Then he gives the phone to the vice captain. The vice captain put the phone to his ear saying yes, Captain, he is on the phone. Now Kim asked him the location where they are heading. Vice captain answered they are not exactly sure yet, but it seems to be around Sihyung in Gyeonggi, and they are currently moving toward the location, sir. Kim answered all right, he will head over there as well. The vice captain answered yes sir. Then the call ended. Agent Yui stood behind Kim and stared at his phone asking was a call from that child. Kim turned his head asking what she knew about Kang. Agent Gu. She coughs answering she is not sure how she should put this, but he probably shouldn't trust him too much. And that's all she can't tell him for now, and she thinks they should go to the location he mentioned and try to find any traces of Yuram. Kim answers all right. On the other side, the lab doctors were clicking the monster's corpse picture. Suddenly the monster started to squirm. Seeing this, the lab doctor was shocked and surprisingly put his hand on his mouth. Moreover, the monster gets up and hits the lab doctor and follows him away. This other lab doctor gets scared and shouts. Further, the monster's body starts getting bigger and it roars and moves toward the lab doctor to kill them. But before the monster attacks them, Kim activates his physical enhancement skill and attacks the monster and splits it. However, the monster's body splatters on the ground while the lab doctors in surprise look up toward the body parts that were falling and put their hands over their faces. After splattering the monster, Kim jumped down and turned his eyes to look toward Agent Gu, saying he must have missed a spot since they were in a hurry. How bothersome. Then he asked her now should they get going. She was surprisingly looking toward him and then nodded. On the other side, Yuram with her spell charm was controlling that whole area. People of that area due to her spell became status. Yuram stood up, was watched down her folded arms. Her cloak was fluttering due to the strong wind, and the machine beside her began injecting something. Soon after, 4 flashes of light occur behind her in lane, and from that flash the former official of Shield Guild land. 4 of them call her master. She turns and looks toward them, saying her faithful servants. 4 of them were sitting down behind her. One of them with gray hairs was ex-Shield Guild Chief Security Taryok Kim. The other one with black hair was ex-Shell Guild Special Forces Captain Minseok Kang. Third one was the lady ex-Shield Guild Magic Team 1 Captain Mai Ae Sin. The fourth one was the ex-Shield Guild Science and Technology Team Captain Hudeok Park, and he was laughing without any reason. Also the saliva was flowing from his mouth. However, Taryok, bending his head, squeezes his eyes, saying her orders have all been fulfilled, master, and they await her next command. Hears this, she smiles, then turns her head, saying, excellent job, this couldn't have been done without their hard work, and she expected no less from the terrorizers of their guild. Further, she says she knows that they all didn't mean to abandon her brother and run away. Hearing this, they get surprised, and Taryok answers, of course not the guild master. They were all biding their time, waiting for her inevitable return. Hears this, she answered yes, of course. After this, she threw 4 injected items toward them. Taryok asked her what these masters. She jumped before them, ordering her to inject them. Then looking toward those injected items, she says those things will lead with to the new world. Hears this, 4 of them remain silent and sweat. Then head up and grab those items and inject them. As soon as they inject, their bodies start to get bigger, and they get more powerful, and their eyes start to glow. Sees this, Yurim laughs, her eyes turn red, and she says them now they will be reborn with this incredible power to transcend into a greater being instead of the garbage they were before. None of the old human race shall stand against them. Then she opens her arm, laugh, saying rejoice and cherish these new blessing of their syndicate hype. While the 4 of them were shouting in pain, also their body was getting bigger and more powerful. However, Yurim saying this all laughs, also her saliva drips from her mouth, and she while laughing says this will be their reckoning. Then looking toward the machine that was injecting behind them, she says they will create a legion with the fire dragon's remains and destroy this country that has forsaken them. They will clean this land of their enemies and build a new world controlled by hype. While her 4 subordinates' bodies were changed, and due to pain they were shouting, and Taryok's mouth was releasing saliva. Moreover, Taram was watching this all hiding behind the wall, and he surprisingly asked himself, what is this thing hype? On the other side, Yui was in the taxi. She was on her way to meet Jinda, and she was continuously dialing his number. But he didn't pick up the phone, and she scrolled the mobile screen herself. She wondered what was going on. Jinda had never cut off contact like this before. Then with a sad face, she says she hopes that it's not a big deal. The taxi driver, hearing this, glances at her, asking hasn't seen her somewhere. Hears this, Yui slightly moves ahead from the seat and laughs, asking does he knows who is she. Also she still has a lot to improve, but she guesses people recognize Yui the Metaber. Hears this, the taxi driver smiles, asking what tuber now, as he is not very familiar with those kinds of stuff. He must have mistaken her for someone else. However, Yui laughs, answering she sees well. It happens to the best of them, while thinking how embarrassing. Further, the taxi driver says he and his son were saved by this girl 6 years ago in Tjumdi Park. He just thought she had a striking resemblance to her. Heard this, Yui slightly react, then she smiled. After this, she taps on her heart pendant, and a flash of light emerges. Their taxi driver turns his head to look back. Yui takes out her cat from her inventory and smiles, showing him the cat, saying the one who saved his son back then was this little friend of hers. The cat takes tongue and creates her voice. After they arrive at their destination, the taxi driver screeches the car. Yui, holding the money, extends her hand to pay the fare and thanks him for the ride. Sees this, taxi driver's hands start shaking, and he smiles, saying it's fine. This is the least he can do for the person who has saved his life. Yui smiled, answering she appreciated it, but she only did what she thought was right back then, and he has taken her quite far today. The taxi driver smiled and held her hand, saying well, let's just leave it at a handshake then, and feel free to call him whenever she needs another ride. He will give her his business card. However, in response, Yui smiles, thinking she is not sure if she should accept this, and then the taxi driver goes back to his taxi. Further, the taxi driver looked through the window, saying her taken care of, and that she should reach downtown Sihyung by walking way. Yui looks toward him through the taxi window and smiles, answering all right, thank him, he takes care of himself as well. After this, Yui places her cat on her shoulder and moves from there on the way to the street. She says to her cat well, she is glad to know that they are doing well. She too right in response, the cat creates its voice. Then looking ahead with a surprised face, she thinks, but she does find it a little strange that the street is empty on a weekend. She was surprised, then she looked in the cafe mirror door and thought something was not right. She looked around her in the street, but there was no one. See this, she ran away from there to check the surrounding area, while on the way she noticed that ashes were falling from the sky. Yui, with a scared face, looks up toward the sky thinking something is falling from the sky, and when she looks ahead, she is shocked to see people there in the street around her turn into monsters. However, in the military base control room, the military soldiers were checking the live camera of all the areas of the city. Also, the captain stood beside them. As soon as they checked the main area of the city, they were shocked to see the situation, and one of them raised his voice saying, "Sir, there is an unidentified flying object. It is flying at much speed toward the city. See this." The captain, in shock, raises his voice to verify its identity immediately. However, the military solider starts checking the city, but suddenly the signal disappears. The captain, panicked, steps ahead and extends their head toward the system, asking if is there an error. The officer of the control room turned his head, answering, "He was not very sure, sir." Then the other officer sat beside him before the system informed it's back on the radar, sir. Hearing this, the captain turned his head toward the system before that officer. The officer tapped something on the keyboard and searched it again, saying they would track down and identify the UFO right away. However, the system started the search again, but the signals dropped again. See this, the captain raises his voice, asking, "What, are they serious? How is that even possible?" The officer fearfully answers, "He is sorry, sir, but that's what the radar is telling them." Moreover, the captain closed his eyes and held his head, asking where was its last identified location. The officer, after a minute of searching, answered the UFO was last seen in Gyeonggi around Sihyung, sir. After this, both Kim, holding Agent Gu, flew over to the city to arrive at the location. On the other side, Yui was shocked to see the people around were turning into monsters. Further, those monsters around her start to squirm. Sees this, she surprisingly thinks, what in the world are these things? Meanwhile, the object that was falling from the sky hit her face. As soon as it hit, that ashes-like object turned into the waylight. As that object hit her face, she was surprised, thinking her automatic shield just activated. However, automatic shield, it's a defensive spell that automatically protects the user from any sudden attacks. The spell was created to help mages defend themselves against ambushes, and is an essential ability for high-ranking mages. Yui extends her hand to check those objects ahead, like objects fall on her hand. She looks up at those objects and thinks she sees this shining dust that must be turning people into monsters. After this, Yui runs away from there thinking, is it a dungeon break? No, then the government should have known about this. While running away, she thinks there must be a source of this magic. Somewhere she has to find it. Further, on the way in the street, she finds a little boy running. Also, the monster is running behind him. Yui ran toward the boy to save him from the monsters, shouting, "Little boy, come back." The boy turned his head to look back. On Kim's side, as he was on his way, the window appeared before him that 1 minute until he arrived in Sihyung. Kim, holding her, flies in the air so fast that she puts her hands over her face. He moves quickly from one place to another in the air, and finally, they arrive at their destination. As Kim landed on the ground, a stormy light spread there, and due to their landing there, the dust and smoke spread there. Kim put her down, and she hardly stood up on her own. Kim looked toward her, asks if she was all right. She squeezed her eyes, answering yes, of course. She had never flown across the sky like that before. Then she got up and smiled, brushing her messy hair, saying, but she was glad they could get there quickly. They didn't have a second to waste. After this, both of them stand there. Kim gets normal, but his hair is still shiny gray, and he, looking ahead, presses his lower lips, and Agent Gu stares at him. Further, they both move from there. While on the way, Agent Gu says, it's interesting to know that his hair changes color. Hears this, Kim remains silent, and she stepped ahead with Kim, thinking she guessed he was ignoring her. However, a window appears before Kim, and the system informs him that an anomaly has been detected in the city. Hears this, Kim surprisingly asks, an anomaly, while Agent Gu stands behind him looking toward him and asks pardon her. Kim turns his head and waves his hand, answering no, it's nothing. Then, stepping ahead, he asked the system to go on, and in response another window appeared before him, and it was written on the window, an immense amount of mana was flowing inside the city. There is an awareness impairment spell spread throughout the city. There is a charming spell spread throughout the city. Hears this, Kim stops there in the street, saying it seems that Urim Park is there. Agent Gu turns her head, asking him how he knows. After this, Kim says to her they should hurry. Then Kim steps ahead while she silently stands there and doesn't move. Then after thinking for a while, she also runs away after him, and the window appears before Kim that they are initiating resistance against status effects. However, that shiny object was falling from the sky. Kim silently kept stepping ahead, and the window appeared before him that he was now immune from the status effect. Agent Gu saw that shiny object and was surprised. After this, in the way Agent Gu tightly holds her nose and fills her mouth, thinking of intoxication. Then from her coat's inner pocket, she takes out the potion bottle and drinks it. While Kim stood aside and watched her doing this all silently, after drinking that potion bottle, she threw the bottle down. However, this was the immunity potion upon consumption. The potion provides resistance to magical effects for 24 hours. Moreover, both of them arrive at the rodeo area and stand there. They are both shocked to see those humans who were turned into monsters. Sees them, Agent Gu surprisingly asks, "What on earth are those things?" Kim looking toward that humans who are turning into monsters and asks the system to analyze them. System answer: initiating analysis. The system starts analyzing those monsters and informs Kim they are human beings infected by an unknown magic. They are being transformed into a human-monster hybrid, and he can stop the transformation by destroying the source of magic inside the city. Agent Gu stood behind Kim, asks him if should they get rid of them. He answered no, those things are still human right now. They have to handle this without confronting them before the situation gets worse. However, both of them run away between those monsters. While running away, Kim asks the system to locate the source of magic. The system starts initiating its search and then tells him the awareness impairment spell is too powerful and he must move to a higher location. However, Kim activates his physical enhancement skill and flies from there, saying to her he would be right there. Sees this while running away and surprisingly looks toward him, asking what Mr. Kim is. Kim carried himself with his magic and flew from their upside. He quickly crossed the building on his way, and then he jumped from one building to another in a second. Moreover, a lot of monsters were in his way, and the monsters looking toward him flew toward them, saying they told them that a rat might show up. Then the other monster sticks out its sticky long tongue, saying he has a lot of guts to come there alone. Kim doesn't listen to them and keeps flying. As Kim flies through them, they all jump and surround him to attack, saying something when a person's talking to him. Further, the monster moves toward him and blocks his way. One of the monsters strikes its sharp arm to attack him, but before it attacks him, Kim kicks one of them and throws it toward the building. The monster crashes into the building and explodes. However, more monsters got there and moved toward Kim to attack him. He was surrounded by the monsters, kicking the second and third monsters and killing them. Kim attacks them one by one and splits them all, and the blood from those monsters' bodies scatters in the air. After killing those monsters, Kim flies and moves away. While on the way, he jumps from the building and kills the monster gets in his way. He splatters them all. After this, he jumps on the building roof and stands up there. He asks the system to locate Urim Park and the source of this magic. The system initiates its search while Urim stands up on the building's roof edge, understanding that Kim has arrived there near her. She gives an evil smile, saying that he has finally arrived. Jabong Kim. The system was still searching for the nearby mana source. It took enough time while Kim stood there on the roof, asking the system what was taking it so long, and in response system remained silent. After searching for a while, system replies the awareness impairment spell is too powerful, and the anomaly of this area is most likely undetectable to those outside of the city. Further, system explains to him that neither the police nor the army will come to assist him. While this spell is active, hearing this, Kim remains silent. While searching, when the system informs him multiple mana sources detected this, Kim is surprised. On the other side, the machine behind Yulmer was still injecting, and she stood there at the edge of the building roof. The system searched and informed Kim there is currently one main supply unit, and this supply sector was the machine that was injecting behind Urim. Then another window appeared and the system informed 4 auxiliary supply units in the area, and these supply sectors were set at different locations in the city. Hears this, Kim clenches his fist and asks the system to mark them on the map. He will destroy them immediately. System answer, he is afraid that's impossible. The main mana supply unit can only be damaged by destroying the 4 auxiliary supplies simultaneously. However, Kim grits. Then another window appears before him that if the auxiliaries are attacked by any other means, they will automatically be repaired. Hears this, Kim thinks how annoying. The system tells him he has detected several individuals who are not under the charm's influence, and these individuals are Agent Gu, the dungeon control team, Yui, and Chen with his team. Also, they were in that area too and heard this. Kim sighed and pressed his lips, saying great timing. After this, he flies and jumps on the building roof, then he flies from there to upward further. Flying from there, he lands down and crashes in the area where Agent Gu is. As he landed, the ground crashed, and the flash of bright light spread there. Agent Gu extended her hand over her face. Also, due to Kim landing there, dust and smoke spread, and from that smoke, Kim came out to see him. She smiled, saying he never ceased to surprise her, Mr. Kim. Moreover, Kim remains silent and then asks her if there's somewhere they need to go. Agent Gu surprisingly asks where. He answers he has found a location where they can stop all of this. On Yui's side, she was running behind that little kid. The kid went into the store. She slammed the store door, calling the little boy. But as she slammed the door, people stood there, got alert, and stepped toward her wearing masks and holding sticks. Also, that little boy went to her mother, who sat there. However, that lady hugs her son and angrily asks Yui, who is she? Yui hands up fearfully and answers, they don't have to be so worried, she is not a bad person to everyone. Then she asks them, does anyone recognizes who she is? People there stare at her and remain silent. Then she taps her pendant and a flash of light emerges from it. From her pendant inventory, she takes out her selfie stick and lifts it, smile, saying they see she is an internet streamer. One of the men among those people who removed his mask tried to recognize Yui, and then a lady standing behind them wearing a mask said she thought she had seen her on Metaber. Further, the man standing beside the lady says he thought he had seen her on TV. Yui smiled and thanked them all for recognizing who she. Also started recording. While recording, she says that she wants to ask all of them what exactly happened to this city. The lady with the sad face took her child in her arms and answered they don't know. People started turning weird a few days ago and now it's come to this. Yui asked, but how is everyone there still unaffected? The lady answered, the red powder in the air right now, it seemed like the powder was causing everyone to transform. Here's this, Yui thinks, as she expected the red powder was what started all this. The mutations were probably caused by the red powder entering the people's bodies. But everyone there in the store was wearing a mask that must have protected them from being affected. Also, the man among those people was coughing. The people were surprisingly looking at him. After this, who removed his mask to recognize Yui asked her if the rescue team must be on their way, right? Yui smiled, answering of course, there was no need to be so scared. Saying this, she thinks no, they couldn't have deployed a rescue team with this awareness impairment spell. Then she taps on her recording device and thinks this is a big problem. However, her device stopped recording due to the internet connection failure. Yui tapped on her device screen, thinking she needed to find a way to inform the people outside. Further, the people in the store get scared and fearfully